2020 was certainly a strong year for IPOs, with the Renaissance IPO ETF far outperforming the broader market, rallying by more than 100%. However, some recent listings are on pace to end the final trading week of 2020 on a low note. DoorDash, Airbnb among the week's biggest losers. For more, let's bring in Bradley Tusk from Tusk Ventures. He was an early investor in Uber as well as Lemonade, which went public earlier this year. I think it was the best performing IPO of the year. He no longer has holdings in either company. Bradley, so that was you selling during that lockup this week.
I'm an early stage tech investor. So once we get into the public markets and my lockup expires, I try to know my lane and get out of the place that I don't really know as well.
Were you surprised at the excitement over IPOs, and is that sustainable into next year?
So, surprised at the level of support and investment that you've seen in it. And to know whether it's sustainable, I think figures out why is this happening in the first place. And there's kind of three reasons in my mind that you could point to. One would be people really, really confident certain types of behavior come back after the pandemic. So, for example, Airbnb is almost 3 times the value of what it was pre-COVID. People obviously very strongly believe that there will be a lot of travel as soon as it's safe to fully do so again, because obviously it hasn't been a great year for Airbnb in terms of activity. On the flip side, DoorDash, while down a little bit recently, also had an incredibly strong IPO. In that case, investors clearly believe that the behavior of ordering in will set into a place where it's basically a permanized thing, and people are always ordering in, whether they go back out to dinner or not. But the other way to look at it is not just a question of whether behavior either locked in or people are excited for things to change, but it's been a really bleak year, right? A global pandemic, a really divisive election, social unrest, just a tough year. And in some ways, when people invest in tech IPOs, whether it's Palantir or Airbnb or DoorDash, or whether they're driving up the price of Tesla, in some ways, I think what they're really saying is, we have hope for the future. We believe that things will be better tomorrow than they are today. And these companies, in some ways, are really just sort of manifestations of that hope. I know this is a little metaphysical, conceptual for closing bell, but I think in some ways, investors are still human beings, or at least those that aren't algorithms, and people want to believe that things will be better.
Bradley, the closing bell welcomes the metaphysical, conceptual, any other big words like that.
Agreed.
One of the themes I wanted to ask about Bradley for next year, in fact, maybe just more broadly for the next decade, do you think we'll see more of an exodus as we've seen over particularly the last couple of months, from big cities like San Francisco for tech companies?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's easy to see why, for example, a Tesla, an Oracle, a Dropbox would move from San Francisco to Austin, right? In Austin, you have a place that is a fun city with a lot of entrepreneurial talent, a great academic base, a lot of other tech companies. It's seen as a very liberal place. The politics of Austin are not that different than the politics of San Francisco, and yet at the same time, Texas as a state has no income tax, so it's incredibly cheaper to live there, to work there. The regulatory burdens are much less. And third, whereas if you were a resident of San Francisco or Los Angeles or New York or any big city in a blue state, your tax dollars are really used to subsidize people in rural communities, smaller cities, things like that. When you live in a place like Austin where there is no state income tax, whatever you pay for locally stays in your community. So whether it's schools or hospitals or anything else. So the value proposition is really, really strong. And there's no reason to expect that to change.
Let's talk Section 230. I see it's one of the items listed in your predictions. So do you think this will actually be revoked? Go through the legislative process? I know President Trump is making an issue right now.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think something will definitely happen on it. Clearly, Biden, from an administrative standpoint, can direct some of his agencies to try to come up with various rules that could change it. But ultimately, you're probably going to need legislation. But look, if you had to bet on what's the single piece of bipartisan tech legislation that can pass, it is a repeal of Section 230, simply because both sides are convinced that Facebook is out to get them. Right? Republicans really, really believe that there's an anti-conservative bias on the platform. Democrats believe that Facebook has been the greatest organizing tool for Republicans in decades, if not ever. And so they each, for their own political interests, don't want to see the platform continue as is. And so when both sides are aligned, at least in thinking, having a common enemy, in which this case it's Facebook and some of the platforms, they may get something done.
So if that happens, what does it do to Facebook's valuation? Does it half it?
Well, it depends. It's interesting because you have to then think about that in tandem with the FTC antitrust prosecution into Facebook, right? So it may be that the ultimate result of the antitrust is to split Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp into 3 separate companies. And some people believe that would actually be a greater valuation than Facebook, all 3 of those companies being inside of Facebook today. But yeah, if ultimately Facebook is legally liable for what its users say, that will change the nature of what's said on the platform and the way that they police it. It will, at least in theory, be a lot less exciting and interesting. That will drive down engagement, which drives down advertising revenue. So it is a major problem. One thing, if I were Facebook, that I would really try to push for is if Congress is going to take away Section 230 protection from you and potentially make you split up into multiple companies, Libra, the payment system that Facebook has been trying to get through, has been stalled in Congress for a while now. If they could get that approved, that would give them new sources of revenue.
Shepard Smith here. Thanks for watching CNBC on YouTube.